Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I have this pair of mid-century-esque, probably 70s dressers. These are going to take a bit of work to transform from dark and dingy into something brighter and more modern. While at first glance this might look like wood grain, it's actually a strange plastic coating over a wood veneer. So you can see here there's the plastic coating on the outside, the wood veneer, and the pressed wood substrate. I have a pair of these. I've got the long dresser and then a taller dresser. The taller one has its own issues. It's got some impressions in the top. These are the legs. Both pieces have the same legs. They are super rough. I'm not really sure what I'm going to be doing with those yet. And as you can see here, there is some loose veneer. I actually love this mid-century hardware, so I'm going to do my best to reuse it. This is a pretty extreme flip, so you're definitely going to want to stick around for this one. My name is Angie and I refinish furniture. Sometimes I paint and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. Welcome to my workroom. First off, as always, I'm going to remove the drawers, make sure that they are in working condition, remove the hardware. And this is what I was worried about. These look like solid brass from the front. They're not, they're plated. So on the back of this, it's actually kind of a silvery color. This means that I can't polish up these handles in particular to a nice shiny brass color. So I'm probably gonna have to spray paint these. I'm fairly certain the metal caps on the feet are solid brass, so I'm gonna have to figure something out as I go along here. A couple of the drawers on the tall dresser had some separation of the veneer from the substrate, which is plywood. Plywood is a fairly common material in curved drawers. Not always, sometimes it's solid wood, but oftentimes it's plywood, and sometimes over time with moisture and humidity, or on the flip side, extreme heat or lack of humidity can cause these layers to separate. So all I'm doing is brushing in some wood glue, and I'm going to clamp these up. Ideally, I would have some sort of long piece of strapping or some sort of board that could bend a little bit, and I would clamp that. I don't have that, so I'm just going to use a million clamps. Once I have these separations fully loaded with glue, I'm going to go ahead and put on some clamps. You can see when I tighten the clamp there is some glue squeeze out. This is actually what you want to see. If you have glued a joint and you put a clamp on it and no glue comes out, you don't really have enough glue in that joint. Normally I would wipe the glue off as I go along. I'm going to be sanding off the bottom of the drawer anyway, so I will just scrape the glue once it's dried and then sand it. I'm going to give this piece a scrub with some Zep Heavy Duty Citrus Degreaser. This and TSP are my two favorite cleaners for really getting through layers of grime and dirt and old furniture polishes. It really cuts through nicely, so I'm just using a Scotchbrite scrubbing pad here to help me and then wiping it off. This one you don't have to rinse. If I was using TSP, and I always forget to mention it and I apologize, but when you use TSP you do have to rinse it off with clean water before you dry it and move on to your next step. My plan at this point, and you'll see it does change slightly, is to strip this weird plastic printed fake wood grain off the top and off of the curved drawers on both dressers, and paint the sides, paint part of the legs, and paint the flat drawers. Initially, I was thinking I would whitewash the wood grain that I'm going to be exposing, and it's not solid wood under this plastic, it's plywood on the drawers and it's pressed wood on the top, with a layer of birch veneer or some similar wood on both of those parts. I'm using my favorite stripper, which is Circa 1850, which is basically going to melt through this layer. I wish I had done a time lapse. Even in regular time, which is shown here as I'm putting it on the drawers, you can see the way the stripper is changing, and it looks like it's drying in spots, but really what it's doing is melting into that weird plastic coating. Some people refer to this coating as laminate, and it is in a way. Technically laminate just means something that's glued, but it's not the same sort of laminate that you see that has a bit of a papery feel. This is a weird, thick, goopy plastic, and you can see here as I'm scraping it away that there's a sort of beige or tan colored product underneath the top finish, which is actually a layer of primer that they used before they put the new faux wood finish on top. And this is such a messy thing to try to strip, but when you're lucky enough to have wood underneath, even if it's a lower quality wood like birch veneer, to me it's still worth it to try to get this stuff off. Yeah, it's really not pleasant to look at. I hope you're not eating snacks right now. So because this is a veneer and I've already taken off that hard plastic coating, I'm going in with my first sanding of a 150 grit. I don't really need anything coarser than that or I risk sanding through the veneer. Now you'll notice I didn't get every single spot of this stuff off. That's okay, I can sand through the little bit that's left. With my first round of sanding, I'm just trying to get the rest of the finish off, even out the surface. Take some of the more superficial marks out, but any remaining scratches and stuff, I'll try to get out with the next round of sanding, which will be 220. I've had quite a few people over the last few months ask why you step up your grits as you're sanding. Why do you start with 80 and then move to 120 and then move to 150 and 180 and 220 and so on? There is a reason for that, and I'm actually going to be doing a video fairly soon where I talk about that a lot more and why that's important. You shouldn't really sand something with an 80 grit and then immediately jump up to 220, especially if you're going to be staining the piece. If you're going to be painting it, it's not that big a deal, but if you're finishing something with a clear finish or a stain in particular, it's really important that you graduate up those grit sizes, and I will tell you why very soon in an upcoming video. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be painting the sides, so I'm doing a scuff sand here with a 150 grit pad. This plastic coating is quite shiny, and generally speaking, paint doesn't stick so well to shiny surfaces. Now, I also get asked why I don't prime that much, and I do prime sometimes, but with the right prep work, the right paint, and the right paint application techniques, you don't always have to. If you don't have to worry about bleed through or adhesion, oftentimes I won't prime, and the paint lasts just as long as it would have if I had primed. On some surfaces though, it's very important to prime, and if you're ever not 100% sure if you should prime just to be safe. It doesn't hurt anything, just do it if you're not confident in the outcome. I don't skip it because I'm cheap or lazy. Sometimes I skip it just because I've been doing it long enough to know what is going to adhere and hold up in the long run. There were a few little spots on this piece where the veneer had chipped, so I'm just using a wood filler in those areas. I'm just applying it with my finger, making sure it gets in all those little cracks, and then I will use a putty knife to smooth it out. While those filled spots are drying and hardening, I'm going to move on to another issue on the top. There were a few dents that if I tried to sand down to the bottom of, I would easily sand through the veneer. These other scratches, lighter scratches, they'll come off when I do my next layer of sanding, but these dents won't. So what I'm going to do is I'm using a wet rag and an iron on the highest setting without steam, and the combination of the heat and the moisture is going to swell those wood fibers and hopefully raise this up enough that I can then sand it. I've seen some people put water directly on the wood and then the iron directly on the water on the wood. I don't recommend that. I like to have a little bit of a buffer, so I use a wet rag. I've got my 220 grit now to try to do the final sanding on the top, and you can see it is pulling out those marks way better than before I used the iron. So it may not be perfect, you might still see a little bit of an indent, but in my opinion this is a success. Once I've fully sanded the top and it's all good to go, I'm just using a tack cloth. You can see there's still a few marks and dings. That's not really going to matter with the finish that I'm putting on top of this. And to me, trying to get every little ding out is not worth the risk of sanding through the veneer. Now, as for these legs, like I said, I'm fairly certain that the caps here are solid brass, but there's so much crud on them. This stripper is safe for wood and metal, so I'm applying it to the entire leg just to try to help me along, and it'll give me a little bit less that I have to polish. Even if these are solid brass caps and I do polish them and they're beautiful, I don't know if I can match the color exactly with a tone of spray paint that I have to use for the other hardware, so I may end up spraying them anyway. I don't know. You'll see the brush is actually picking up a bit of the gold spray paint from the cardboard. That's okay, this is all going to come off anyway. But before I give you the sweet, sweet satisfaction of seeing these legs with all this crud off of them, I want to take a moment to thank my most recent tea buyers. These awesome folks have bought me teas over the last couple of weeks. The Buy Me a Coffee app is a way for people to say thanks, send a few bucks if you enjoy the content. And what I use it for is buying more tools, paint, sometimes more project pieces. This isn't a necessity to view my channel, this is just something that some folks like to do, and it's so appreciated. One of these folks asked if I was located in Canada or the USA. I am in Nova Scotia, Canada. And Val, I want to thank you for mentioning the bunnies. They're such a huge part of my life. I know some people actually have left me pretty crappy comments about putting my pets in occasionally for little cameos, but that's just me and it's part of the experience I want to create here, so you'll have to get over it. Thank you so much, guys, for the tease. Okay, back to work. I'm using a 4.0 steel wool here to remove this stuff. It's quite thick and goopy and it doesn't come off quite as easily when you're not using a scraper like I was on the top. But I just keep flipping the steel wool around and eventually this all gets clean. So you can see this looks so much better. I've already decided though I'm going to be painting these, but even so, I needed to have a look at this bear before I made my decision. I still want to see what color comes up if I polish the brass tips here. So I'm using a non-abrasive Scotchbrite pad and some Barkeeper's Friend to try to get off all of this tarnish. And you can see it's a lot of elbow grease. This was not easy to take off for sure. There's a few little bits that are tarnished and stuck on. I do like the color, but because I'm not really able to polish these to the same color, and I'll show you here what I mean. I'm actually using the same stuff on this, and you can see that once that plating comes off, it is silver underneath, or silver colored. It's not literally silver. So these are definitely going to be spray painted, and I may as well do the caps on the legs to match because it's going to take so much time to polish up 8 legs when they're not going to be perfect and they're not going to match the hardware. So I want this to be cohesive. I'm spray painting all of the metal. So I know I initially said I was going to be whitewashing the exposed wood grain. I changed my mind. I'm opting to use this Artminds white wax. Artminds is a Michaels brand. This is a fairly inexpensive wax that I've been using since I started furniture, and I actually really like it. It's going to give me that light tone that I wanted with the whitewashing without having to deal with the hassle of the whitewashing probably raising the wood grain and me having to sand it again. Plus, this is going to seal it all in one step, so this is what I opted to do instead of whitewashing. And you can see the difference here. This last drawer has not been done yet. I don't care for that sort of yellowy tone. I like the lighter tone. So this stuff is great. You can get it at Michaels. This is also a Artminds wax brush, which you can also get at Michaels. Waxes like this aren't always the easiest to use. It takes a little bit of practice to get the hang of the application, wiping it off without ruining it. So my advice, if you want to try this stuff, don't try it on a big dresser top like this first. Try it on a small like end table or a drawer face, something like that until you get the hang of it. Another thing about wax, I tend to use it more on the sides of pieces or drawer faces, legs. It's not something I would necessarily recommend for like a coffee tabletop or a dining room tabletop. I've done it on occasion and they do hold up okay, but when it's exposed to heat, for example, the wax will sort of melt a bit and sort of reactivate, and it can be a pain in the butt to try to fix it. So now, it's not quite the same with a hard wax. Those behave a little bit different, you know, like the old-fashioned, in air quotes here, hard waxes. Those usually do okay on coffee tabletops and dining room tabletops. I'm finally getting to try out a new color by Fusion Mineral Paint. This color is called Eucalyptus. It's basically kind of a soft, muted green with a touch of gray, like gray undertones. And it looks a lot lighter here than it's going to dry. It'll still be a nice soft tone, but it almost looks white in this shot, and it's not. So you see when I'm applying my paint, I kind of just put it on in any direction I need to, but before it hardens up, I take my brush and smooth it out. Speaking of brushing and brush strokes, I get asked a lot about how to minimize brush strokes, and there are tons of videos on it out there. While I don't love brush strokes. I'm not one of those who is absolutely appalled by them and completely turned off by them. To me, this is a hand-painted piece. If there's brush strokes, that's okay. It was literally brushed on, and I don't go out of my way to try to get every single one out. You can mist with a little bit of water as you're painting, use a soft bristled brush, sand very lightly in between layers. This will all help minimize it. Also, not using too much paint on your brush, that's a big one. But for me, I don't mind the look of some brush strokes. These are the drawer pulls. I washed them really well with a degreasing cleanser, dried them, and I'm spraying the first of 3 very light coats of the champagne gold spray paint. I love this color. I don't get to use it very often. I tend to use more sort of traditional gold, but on this light soft piece, I just wanted to tone it down a little bit. Well, the end is near. Finally, these took about 2 days, and when I usually give you my times, that includes the dry time, so it wasn't literally 2 full days of work. Just reattaching the hardware, reattaching the legs, and let's have one more look at these 2 pieces. At first glance, these look like junk. They look like that cheap laminate, but there was actual real wood and wood veneer underneath this plastic crap. So these have gone from dark and dingy to bright and modern. Let's have a look now. Thanks for watching.